Good morning, students. Today we are going to start with the story Dr. Heidgers' Experiment, composed by Nathan Hawthorne. Before starting the proper translation of the story, I would like to tell you about the author of this story. Nathan Hawthorne is a legendary figure in American literature. He was born in 1804, but unfortunately, he lost his father at the age of 12. His mother took him to her brother for schooling. At Borden College, where he studied for 4 years, he was known as an idle student, always engaged in reading. He made friends there, and one out of them was Franklin Pierce, who later became the President of USA and made Hawthorne American Consul at Liverpool. Although Hawthorne began to publish stories at an early age, but recognition came to him rather late in life after the publication of the famous novel, the great novel, The Scarlet Letter. Whereas the story is concerned, Dr. Heidgers' Experiment is a truly representative short story in which Hawthorne tries to show how human nature is essentially incorrigible. Four old persons, three men, and a widow, they are made young once again by the magic drug, only to be seen behaving irresponsibly like for wanton young people. Even when they return to dotage, they still dream of eternal youth and plan to go in search of the fountain of youth. As the story starts, that very singular man, Dr. Heidger, once invited four venerable friends to meet him in her study. That very strange, that very singular, that very peculiar person, Dr. Heidger, once invited four of his respectable friends to meet him in his library, in his study room. There were three white-bearded gentlemen, Mr. Madborn, Colonel Killigrew, and Mr. Gascoigne, and a withered gentlewoman whose name was Widow Wycherley. Out of these four guests, out of these four friends, three were white-bearded gentlemen. Three were old-aged gentlemen, and their names were Mr. Madborn, Colonel Killigrew, and Mr. Gascoigne. And the fourth one was a withered gentlewoman. Withered gentlewoman means an old lady that was having wrinkles on her skin, and her name was Widow Wycherley. They were all melancholy old creatures who had been unfortunate in life and whose greatest misfortune it was that they were not long ago in their graves. Whereas the condition of these four friends of Dr. Heidger was concerned, they were all melancholy old creatures. They were all pale, they were all sad, old human beings who had been unfortunate in life. Whereas their life was concerned, they were unfortunate. As the writer says, and whose greatest misfortune it was that they were not long ago in their graves. This was their greatest misfortune. That they were still alive. They were not dead. They were not gone to their graves. Mr. Madborn, in the vigor of his age, had been a prosperous merchant but had lost his all by a frantic speculation and was now little better than a mendicant. Talking about the first friend, the first guest of Dr. Heidgers, the writer says that Mr. Madborn, in the vigor of his age means when he was young, had lost his wealth. He was in his young age, he was a very rich, very prosperous businessman, but just because of frantic speculation means the habit of gambling. Just because of the habit of gambling, he lost whatsoever he was having in the name of prosperity and was now little better than a mendicant. Now, the condition of this man was a bit better than a beggar. Colonel Killigrew had wasted his best years and his health and substance in the pursuit of sinful pleasures, which had given birth to a brood of pains such as the gout and divers other torments of souls and body. Talking about the second guest, the second friend of Dr. Heidgers, the writer says that Colonel Killigrew, he wasted his best years, means he wasted his young age. Not only the time, he also wasted his health, his substance, the prosperity, the wealth he was having in the pursuit of sinful pleasures. He was engaged in delightful activities, sensual activities, and as a result of that, he lost whatsoever he was having, whether it was his body or wealth. As a result, he says, his body was suffering from different type of diseases such as gout, means joints pain, arthritis, and other torments, other sufferings of soul and body. Mr. Gascoigne was a ruined politician, a man of evil fame, or at least had been so till time had buried him from the knowledge of the present generation and made him obscure instead of infamous. Whereas the third one was concerned, Mr. Gascoigne, he was a ruined politician. He was a failed politician, a man of evil mien, a person whose image was not good. He was famous for bad activities, or at least had been so till time had buried him from the knowledge of the present generation. Just because of such actions, he was almost unknown to the people of present generation. Such actions, such conditions made him obscure instead of infamous. He became strange, he became peculiar to the present generation instead of being infamous. As for the widow Weiserly, tradition tells us that she was a great beauty in her days, whereas the fourth one, the lady is concerned. whose name was Widow Weiserly, time tells us, the tradition tells us, that when she was young, she was quite a beautiful lady. But for a long time past, she had lived in deep seclusion. Since long time, she had been living in isolation. On account of certain scandalous stories which had prejudiced the gentry of the town against her. The reason of the isolation was the scandalous stories. There were some shameful stories about this lady and the people, especially the gentry. Gentry means a particular class who is below nobility, we can say the middle class people. They started hating her, and as a result, she kept herself in isolation. It is a circumstance worth mentioning that each of these three old gentlemen, Mr. Madbone, Colonel Killigrew, and Mr. Gascoigne, were early lovers of Widow Wycherley and had once been on the point of cutting each other's throat for her sake. The writer says that it is proper to mention here that once there was a time when all these old gentlemen, when they were young, they were in love with this lady, and there was a time when they were even in a position to murder one another for the sake of this lady. And before proceeding further, I will merely hint that Dr. Heidgers and all his four guests were sometimes thought to be a little besides themselves. He says that before proceeding further in the story, I would like to tell not only the four venerable guests, the four venerable friends of Dr. Heidgers, but he himself. They were not reacting, they were not behaving properly or according to their age, as is not infrequently in the case with old people. Generally, it is not seen in the case of aged people. When worried either by the present troubles or woeful recollections, he says that the behavior of these five candidates that were not according to their age. Generally, it is seen an old person when he or she behaves according to the present problems, or when he or she recalls the past experiences of life. That's all about today's lecture. Today we started it. We discussed the names, the properties, the characteristics of the four friends of Dr. Heidgers. In the coming lecture, we shall continue the story and we shall start with the description of the study or the library room of Dr. Heidgers. Till then, keep up revising it. Thank you very much.